Welcome, I'm Patrick, and today I'll be covering restaurant deaths that will shock you with just how many ways food can kill you. From a man who couldn't stop vomiting after eating something spicy to a guy whose stomach gave out in front of the staff, making dinner the most horrific thing you'll hear today. It was September 14th, 2017, and the smell of hickory smoke and vinegar-based sauce hung in the air of a small barbecue restaurant wedged into a strip mall outside Nashville, Tennessee, where a chalkboard near the register listed a spice challenge that had been on the menu for over 2 years and had been completed, according to the tally marks beneath it, 14 times. Cale Dunwoody was 28 years old, a union pipe fitter, single, and the type of guy who turned everything into a competition. He had this group chat going with his 5-man crew, where they bet on everything: who could hold a plank longest, who finished a task first, who could handle the hottest thing on whatever menu they walked into. The night before, he had texted a photo of the restaurant's challenge board to the group with no caption. By morning, 4 of the 5 had replied with the same word: won't. He screenshotted it, made it his lock screen, and showed it to the waitress before he even sat down. He walked in carrying their doubt on his lock screen like a boarding pass, and I think that's what sets this whole thing up. The challenge was a plate of wings coated in a concentrate made with peppers, advertised at over 2 million Scoville units. You had to sign a waiver before they would even bring it out, covering allergic reactions, digestive issues, skin irritation, all of it. Cale signed it without reading past the first line. His waitress said the first thing he asked was how fast the record was, not what was in the sauce, just how fast. He finished the plate. People sitting nearby said he was red-faced, eyes watering, but sitting up straight and grinning when he put down the last bone. He walked to the bathroom. I need you to pay attention here, because the wings didn't kill him. What happened in the bathroom did. Friends later said Cale had eaten the wings fast and chased them with several glasses of water, which people do all the time during these challenges, but it just adds volume to a stomach that's already on fire. The capsaicin set off violent vomiting that wouldn't stop. Not a few rounds, prolonged retching that other people in the restaurant said they could hear through the bathroom door for several minutes. One couple near the hallway said the sound didn't stop for what they estimated was close to 10 minutes. Force of the repeated contractions had torn his lower esophagus. Air and gastric contents began leaking into the mediastinum, the central cavity of his chest. I need you to think about what that means. Doctors believed the continued vomiting worsened the contamination inside his chest with every retch. He came out of the bathroom pale, sweating, and holding his chest. His waitress later said he told her he was fine, just needed air. Paid his tab. He walked out to the parking lot. He drove himself home. A friend who saw him later that night said Cale told him his chest felt wrong, but he figured he pulled a muscle from throwing up so hard. Over the next few hours, the pain started moving, chest to back, back to shoulder. Then this pressure he described to ER staff as something sitting on his ribs. His breathing got shorter, and he couldn't lay flat without it getting worse. By the time a friend talked him into going to the ER, and from what the friend later said, it took almost an hour of going back and forth before Cale would even get in the car. Imaging revealed free air in the mediastinum and fluid collecting in the chest cavity. He was taken to surgery. The tear was repaired, but by the time surgeons operated, infection had already spread aggressively through the chest cavity. Mediastinitis set in. He got worse through the night and into the following morning. 24 hours from that first bite, and he drove himself home from the restaurant. I keep coming back to that. He died the following afternoon, roughly a day after the challenge. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be sepsis secondary to mediastinitis, resulting from esophageal perforation. The restaurant quietly removed the challenge from the menu within the week. No criminal charges were filed. The family sued, and during discovery, the signed waiver and the group chat were both pulled into the case file. Nobody in the group had replied after the news reached them. The chat went silent and stayed that way. All right, so the reason I put this 1 second is because it's the opposite of what you just heard. No dare, no bravado, just a man on the same bar stool he'd been sitting on for years, eating the same thing he always ordered, with a body that was quietly falling apart underneath him. It was a Friday evening on August 7, 2015, and the heavy salt air off the Gulf hung over a small oyster bar built onto the end of a wooden dock in a coastal parish in southern Louisiana, where 12 bar stools faced an open shucking station and a hand-painted sign listed the day's catch in chalk. Hoyt Trosclair was 53 years old, a marine engine mechanic who fixed boat motors along the coast for a living. Divorced, lived alone in a rented house near the water. He had been going to this same oyster bar every Friday night for years. Same stool, same order, half dozen raw and a beer. The bartender kept a running tab for him in a handwritten ledger because Hoyt paid once a month instead of every visit. His ex-wife later said that he hadn't seen a doctor in over 12 years. She said she stopped asking after the divorce. The one time she pushed him on it, he told her his father never saw a doctor either and made it to 74. His father died at 74 of liver failure. Hoyt repeated that number like it was a finish line, not a warning. He turned his father's age into a reason to never see a doctor, never knowing his own liver was already going the same way. To me, that's the cruelest irony in this entire video. He ate his regular order that evening, half a dozen on the half shell, a cold beer, same thing he always got. The bartender later told a reporter he shucked them right in front of Hoyt the way he always did, and Hoyt sat there watching a game on the TV above the bar, picking them off the tray one at a time between sips. Talked about a boat engine giving him trouble that week. Told the bartender the oysters were good that night. Nothing about the evening was different. He closed out and walked to his truck. There was nothing wrong with the sourcing. The oysters were legally harvested, properly handled, and up to code. But raw Gulf oysters in warm water months naturally carry a bacterium called Vibrio vulnificus. In a healthy person, the body fights it off. In someone with a damaged liver, and Hoyt's was far worse than anyone knew, it gets into the blood fast and multiplies with almost nothing to stop it. Within 24 hours, Hoyt came down with a high fever, chills, and vomiting. He stayed home and tried to ride it out the same way he handled everything else. By the second day, large fluid-filled blisters had erupted across both legs. Hemorrhagic bullae, a hallmark of Vibrio septicemia. The file described them as dark, blood-filled, some the size of a fist, and the infection was already destroying soft tissue in both legs. A neighbor who checked on him after he missed a scheduled engine job found him on his bathroom floor, barely responsive, and called 911. Nobody came looking because they were worried about him. A boat engine didn't get fixed on time, and I want you to sit with that because that's what got someone to his door. He was transported to a regional hospital. The infection was already destroying soft tissue in both legs, then septic shock. Doctors threw everything at it, IV antibiotics, surgical debridement, but his organs started shutting down and nothing brought his blood pressure back. He died on the third day after the meal. Half a dozen oysters in 3 days. That's the whole math on this one, and I still can't wrap my head around it. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be septic shock, secondary to Vibrio vulnificus septicemia, with the undiagnosed liver disease listed as a major contributing factor. In the examiner's notes, his liver was already so far gone that he would have needed treatment within a few years, no matter what, and Hoyt had no idea. From what I read, routine medical testing likely would have shown signs of liver damage years earlier, and he went 12 years without a single checkup. The county health department put out an advisory about raw shellfish and liver conditions. The oyster bar started posting a warning sign at the shucking station. No charges were filed. The oysters met every handling standard. This next one is the one I kept coming back to during research, and it's not because of how she died. It's because of the day in the middle where she felt fine, where her body told her the worst was over and it was lying. It was October 6th, 2018, and the first weekend of fall had drawn a full reservation list to a small farm-to-table restaurant set back from a 2-lane road in Oregon wine country, where the kitchen's seasonal prix-fixe menu was built around foraged ingredients from a local supplier the chef had used for over 3 years. Maureen Kilcoyne was 42 years old, a landscape architect out of Portland, married, no kids. She had this handwritten list in her purse of every restaurant she wanted to eat at, ranked by how local their ingredients were. And every time she went to one, she crossed it off and wrote a little note next to it. This restaurant had been on her list for over a year. Originally number 3, moved to #1 twice, but she could never get a reservation. Her husband told a reporter she talked about the place so often he could recite the seasonal menu from memory without ever having eaten there. I spent a while thinking about that list, because it tells you this wasn't just dinner. She had turned the reservation into a finish line. 4 months of waiting, and the meal was the prize. The dinner was an anniversary celebration. 4 months on the wait list. She ordered the full tasting menu, which included a foraged wild mushroom course. Her husband later said she photographed every plate as it came out and kept leaning over to describe what she was tasting, things he said he never would have noticed on his own. When the mushroom course arrived, she went quiet after the first bite, closed her eyes, and just nodded. She told him it was the best thing she had ever eaten and finished the plate before he was halfway through his. The mushrooms had been supplied by a forager the restaurant had worked with since opening. What nobody caught was that a single contaminated collection had been mixed into an otherwise safe batch. Investigators later believed the forager had picked several Amanita phalloides, death-cap mushrooms, mistaking them for edible puffballs or other local species they can resemble in early growth stages. In that part of Oregon, the two grow in the same places at the same time of year. 6 to 10 hours after the meal, Maren got violently sick. Nausea, cramping, diarrhea. She figured it was food poisoning. Her husband said she apologized for ruining the anniversary. And then something happened that made this one stick with me longer than any other story in the video. The symptoms stopped. She felt better. For about a full day, she genuinely thought the worst had passed. And she even texted a friend saying she was recovering, and the restaurant owed her a do-over. What she was in is called the false recovery window of amatoxin poisoning. The symptoms stop, the patient feels fine, and while the body feels normal, the toxin is already in the liver, quietly destroying cells from the inside. She was dying during the text message. She just couldn't feel it yet. I had to read that twice. By the third day, her skin had taken on a yellowish cast. Blood work revealed liver enzymes spiking to critical levels. She was transferred to a transplant-capable hospital. Her husband said she was still planning things in the ambulance, asking how long the stay would be. Over the following days, her liver function collapsed. Jaundice deepened. Her blood lost the ability to clot, and bruises started showing up on their own. Her thinking started to go as toxins her liver could no longer filter built up in her blood. She was placed on the transplant list, but she deteriorated too quickly for a match. She died roughly 5 days after the dinner. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be acute hepatic failure secondary to amatoxin poisoning from Amanita phalloides ingestion. The publicity and lawsuits forced the restaurant to close within months. 2 other diners who ate the same course were hospitalized and survived. Both had eaten smaller portions. Health authorities opened a review into foraged ingredients in commercial kitchens. The forager's credentials became the focus of a wrongful death suit. Her list was recovered from her purse during the investigation. The restaurant crossed off, and next to it, she had written 3 words: worth the wait. I don't think I need to say anything else about that. So I debated where to put this next one because it's the quietest death in here. No scene, no moment. She ate lunch, went back to work, and didn't know anything was wrong until the damage was already done. It was a cold, overcast afternoon on March 15th, 2016, and the lunch rush had just started thinning out at a small Mediterranean restaurant on a side street in a mid-sized city in the American Northeast, where the kitchen ran a tight crew of 4, and the heavy-duty blender behind the line had been running sauces and dressings since the restaurant opened. Leora Bensadoun was 35 years old, a pediatric speech therapist who worked out of a rented office about 3 blocks from the restaurant. Single, lived with a roommate. She ate at this place 2 or 3 times a month, always between her afternoon and evening sessions, always in a window of less than 40 minutes. She ate fast, not competitively. There was nothing showy about it. She just ate the way some people walk, fast, and without really thinking about it. Her roommate told investigators Leora once casually mentioned she finished a full plate in under 4 minutes. She swallowed large bites with barely a pause. Her roommate said she once watched Leora eat an entire grain bowl without her fork stopping a single time. Under any other circumstance, eating fast is just a quirk, something your friends give you a hard time about at dinner. And it kills me that it's the reason something sharp got past her teeth. That afternoon, the kitchen's commercial blender container finally failed. The jar was thick, hard polycarbonate, and had been in daily use since the restaurant opened. Staff later told investigators it had been clouding and chipping for months, and the kitchen manager had found fragments in the drain trap before, but never pulled the jar from service. A weakened section gave way during a sauce blend. A shard of rigid plastic, barely a centimeter long, but thin as a blade, with a fractured edge sharp enough to cut on contact, broke off and ended up in the sauce, buried in a thick blended mixture that was already gritty with seeds and dried spices. It went out on Leora's plate. She ate it the way she ate everything, fast, without pausing between bites. A coworker who sometimes ate lunch with her said Leora mentioned feeling something sharp go down, but waved it off. The sauce on her plate was thick and gritty with seeds and crushed spices, so an odd texture was normal for that dish. And she ate so fast, she was used to swallowing things she hadn't fully chewed. She paid, walked back to her office, and saw her evening clients. She was sitting across from a child, helping them form sounds, while a piece of hard plastic worked its way through her intestine. I haven't been able to shake that image. That night, a dull ache settled into her lower abdomen. She figured it was just her stomach being weird, took an antacid, and went to bed. By the following morning, the pain had sharpened and localized to her right side. She called in late to work, which her office manager later said she had never done before in 3 years, and drove herself to an urgent care clinic, which referred her to an emergency department. The initial assessment, from what I found in the notes, suspected appendicitis, but imaging revealed something else: a perforation of the small intestinal wall, with early signs of free fluid in the abdominal cavity. She was taken into emergency surgery. Over roughly 12 hours, the thin shard had sliced through part of the small intestine wall, leaving a small opening that wouldn't close on its own. Gut contents, bacteria, half-digested food, all of it had been leaking into her abdominal cavity since the night before. By the time she reached surgery, peritonitis was already developing. Surgeons repaired the tear, but the contamination had spread further than the scans showed. Sepsis set in after surgery, and she kept getting worse over the following day. She died 2 days after the meal. 2 days. I keep thinking if she had gone in the night before when the ache first started, the contamination window would have been hours shorter. But she didn't go because it felt like indigestion. She ate fast and her stomach always felt a little off, and she'd learned to just push through it. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be septic shock, secondary to peritonitis from intestinal perforation by a foreign body. The health inspection afterward found the cracked container still in use. The restaurant group rewrote its inspection policies, and the incident became the subject of a wrongful death lawsuit. Her roommate said Leora had texted her the night before about the stomachache, calling it a rough day, and that ended up being the last text between them. I'm going to be honest. This next one made me angry in a way the others didn't. 60 people watched, some of them cheering, some of them with their phones out. And the thing that killed him is something the human body does when you refuse to stop forcing food into it. It was July 20th, 2019, and a Saturday afternoon crowd had gathered on the patio of a large comfort food restaurant in a small city in central Texas, where a hand-painted banner hung over the entrance advertising the restaurant's 5th annual summer eating competition. Timed, public, with a cash prize and a framed photo on the wall for the winner. Breck Olander was 24 years old, an apprentice diesel mechanic, and a guy who collected wins that didn't matter to anyone but him. And honestly, not in a sad way. He just genuinely loved keeping score. He had a note on his phone listing every restaurant that had ever comped him a meal, with the date, the location, and what he earned. His girlfriend said during the lawsuit deposition that he once drove 40 minutes each way to a town he had never been to because a diner there ran a pancake challenge that came with a free t-shirt. He didn't even like pancakes. He just wanted the shirt, and that shirt was still in the back seat of his truck when investigators pulled his records. The restaurant's annual competition, was going to be entry number 19 on his list. 18 entries, 18 wins, all in a note on his phone that nobody else ever saw. And what gets me is he wasn't performing for anyone. He was competing with a spreadsheet. The competition was over 8 pounds of food, multiple burgers, several pounds of loaded fries, coleslaw, pie, and nearly a gallon of liquid between water and soft drinks, all in under 30 minutes. 8 contestants. A crowd of roughly 60 spectators. No medic on site, nobody with any medical training as far as anyone could tell. The restaurant had run the event 4 previous years without incident. People brought lawn chairs and someone had a speaker playing music. It felt more like a tailgate than something that could go wrong. Breck ate aggressively from the start. Other contestants said he was locked in, eating steady, ahead of everyone within the first 10 minutes. Roughly 20 minutes in, 2 contestants dropped out. Breck continued. People closest to the table said his pace slowed noticeably around the 22-minute mark. He paused. He closed his eyes, his hand pressed flat against his upper abdomen. A couple of people near the table said he retched once, hard, before going back in. His body told him, and I need you to understand, that pain like that, at that level of distension, is not subtle. He felt it, closed his eyes, and pushed the next bite in anyway. What happened next took less than a minute. His stomach wall, stretched way past what it was built to hold, ruptured. The autopsy later documented a tear along the greater curvature. Stomach acid and half-digested food flooded into his abdominal cavity. Breck doubled forward, both hands flat on the table, and fell sideways off the bench onto the patio concrete. People at the table said he went rigid, like something had locked up inside him. He was conscious, curled on his side, unable to speak. His face had gone white. The girl sitting across from him said she didn't get what was happening at first, because his face didn't look like anything she had ever seen at a table. Several people in the crowd were still filming. I'm not going to pass along what witnesses said they heard. The descriptions are in the file, and I think you understand what kind of pain makes a grown man sound like that. Someone in the crowd called emergency services. A woman who said she was a nurse got down next to him and told everyone not to move him. Paramedics arrived within minutes and transported him to a hospital. Imaging confirmed a gastric rupture with massive contamination already spreading. He was taken to surgery. But by that point, the damage inside was already too far along. He died early the following morning after emergency surgery. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be hemorrhagic shock and peritonitis, secondary to spontaneous gastric rupture from acute gastric distension. The restaurant permanently canceled the annual competition. No criminal charges were filed, but the family sued, arguing that a waiver doesn't cover running an event like that without a single medic on site. His phone, with the list of 18 completed challenges, was entered into evidence. Entry 19 was never added. His girlfriend told investigators she had no idea the list existed until a lawyer showed it to her. And she said she scrolled through all 18 and didn't recognize most of the restaurant names because he never took her to any of them. I want to be clear about why this last one is the closer. Every other person in this video made a choice, signed a waiver, ignored a symptom, trusted a menu, ate too fast. This woman didn't make a choice. She flagged the danger in writing 3 separate times, and she still showed up the next morning because her son needed her to. It was January 9th, 2014, and the overhead fluorescent lights of a commercial catering kitchen in a mid-sized Midwestern city buzzed above a long stainless steel prep line where a crew of 6 prepared bulk meals for institutional clients, schools, care facilities, and event venues in volumes that required industrial-scale equipment running through most of the shift. Vesna Filipovic was 46 years old, the head cook, originally from Bosnia, and had been living in the US for over 20 years. Single mother. Her son was 15. She worked early shift 5 days a week and took overtime whenever it came up, which was most weeks. Her son later told investigators she would leave for work before he woke up and be home in time to make him dinner. same schedule every day. She was the longest tenured kitchen employee at the facility, and co-workers all said the same thing about her. She was the one who trained every new hire and caught problems before management ever did. She kept a small spiral notebook in her apron pocket. Every time the pressure kettle's locking mechanism stuck, slipped, or needed to be forced shut by hand, she wrote it down. Dates, short descriptions, what she did to work around it. She made copies of those pages and handed them to management 3 times. The first 2 got a verbal acknowledgement. The third got nothing. That third photocopy was still in her apron pocket when paramedics cut the apron away from her body. It was photographed during the OSHA documentation. I went through that notebook page by page, and the first few entries are careful, neat, almost formal, like she expected someone to actually read them. By the last few, they're one line. Just a date and the word again. She stopped explaining because she figured out no one was ever going to look. That morning, the crew was running a large batch of soup in the industrial pressure kettle, roughly 30 gallons. The locking mechanism, which Vesna had documented failing 11 times over the months before, didn't fully catch. The seal held at first as pressure built, but once the contents hit full temperature, well above boiling point, the weakened latch gave way. The lid blew open. It wasn't a slow leak. The pressure blew the contents upward and outward in a burst that covered the area around the unit. Vesna was standing right beside the unit, ladling a previous batch into transport containers. She took the worst of it, superheated liquid across both arms, her chest, her neck, and the left side of her face. The liquid was pressurized above standard boiling point, and it caused severe burns on contact. And because it was a thick, starch-heavy soup base, it clung to her skin instead of running off, which kept the heat on her skin longer and made the burns worse than hot water alone would have. The thickness of the soup is what made it a good recipe, and it's exactly what made the burns deeper. I've been sitting with that one for a while. Co-workers pulled her back and called 911. One co-worker said when they pulled the soup-soaked fabric away from her arms, the skin came with it. She was conscious. They said she didn't scream. She made a sound one co-worker described as low and constant, like she was holding her breath and failing. She was airlifted to a regional burn center. Doctors assessed mixed, partial, and full-thickness burns covering roughly 30% of her body. Over the days that followed, infection took hold in the burned tissue. Her body went into a systemic inflammatory response. Her kidneys started to go. Then everything else followed. She died 6 days after the incident. Her son was at the hospital for every one of those 6 days. A nurse said he brought his homework and sat in the waiting room the entire time. He was 15 years old. 15, with his homework in a hospital waiting room for 6 straight days. I had to put the file down after that one. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be multi-organ failure secondary to sepsis from infected thermal burns. Workplace safety investigators showed up within hours. Vesna's spiral notebook became the central piece of evidence. 11 entries, 11 dates, 11 times the locking mechanism failed, and 11 times she documented it, handed it up, and came back the next morning to stand in front of the same machine. Management faced a criminal negligence review because the equipment had been flagged in writing and nothing was done. The kitchen was shut down. Several of the company's institutional contracts were pulled while the investigation was ongoing. Her notebook was entered into the investigation file. The last entry was dated 9 days before her death. Just the date and one word. She wasn't writing for the record anymore. She was writing because it was the only thing left she could do, and it still wasn't enough. Her son went to live with relatives after the funeral, and according to a family member who spoke to local press, he kept asking why nobody listened to her.